Hi everyone, welcome back to Grounded Haven Homestead. Today I'm going to be showing you some meals that we ate in a day. I'm going to show you breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and there's also going to be a bonus dessert as well. All of these meals are very heavily plant-based, and if they're not fully vegetarian, they can be made vegetarian very easily. So this is going to be great for anyone who is looking to eat a more plant-based diet, or maybe limit your meat intake, or just have overall healthier, more balanced meals, with the exception of dessert, of course, where we are going to be indulging a little bit. So let me get started first with our breakfast. For breakfast this day, we decided to make a juice. So we're just prepping up a bunch of vegetables and fruit. We have a huge bowl of kale and also a few stalks of celery. We also threw in some parsley, and for sweetness, we're going to add a few apples in there. We don't usually follow a specific recipe for our juices. We'll just use what we have, and during the growing season, we'll use what's coming out of the garden. This is going to be a green juice, and in addition to our greens, we like to pair it with some apples. We'll usually try to aim for maybe 70% vegetables and 20% fruit to add a little bit of sweetness and to balance any bitterness or strong vegetal flavors that might come from the vegetables. Some things that we also usually like to add are a good chunk of ginger, which is good for your immune system, and also some citrus. So we'll either use lemon or lime just to give it a little bit of extra brightness. Here is our full bowl of produce that we're going to be juicing. It is packed full of nutritious vegetables, and it does look like a lot, but when you juice, it takes a lot of produce to produce a good amount of juice. I do like adding a few leaves of parsley whenever we juice, which I feel is something that you wouldn't normally think of, but parsley is super high in vitamin C, and we'll just put a few sprigs in there. Not enough to change the flavor overwhelmingly, but just to add a little bit more nutrition, and it's a good way to use the stems as well. And one thing that we almost always have is ginger, because it gives it a really nice spicy kick that is really good for your immune system. So now we just have to throw everything through the juicer. One thing about juicers is that they are a pain in the butt to clean because of all the pieces and those fibers that get stuck in there. So whenever we do this, we make a massive batch, enough for a few days, and then we can just keep this in the container and have a little bit for each day. That way we don't have to pull out our juicer a few days in a row. So even though we are using a lot of produce here, it is going to make about 6 servings for us. It's such a good idea to make these juices every so often in the winter, especially when you feel like you might be coming down with something, just to pack a lot of nutrition in there. But we also really love to juice in the summer and when the garden is growing, because when you have so much kale and cucumbers, this is a really good way to use them up. So we put it through our juicer, and unless you have a really expensive juicer, you'll most likely be left with a little bit of pulp. So we just like to run it through a sieve to get rid of any of those extra fibers so that it's a nice smooth juice, and this is what it ends up looking like. If you're not used to green juices, this might look kind of gross, but it does actually taste pretty good, and if it's a little bit too strong for you, adding more apples or some kind of fruit in there makes it a lot more palatable, and it tastes a lot better than it looks. To go along with breakfast, we just had a boiled egg along with some toast and jam. The egg and toast are pretty standard for us. We have this very often for breakfast, but having that juice is something just a little bit extra, and it's a great way to start off the day by having some actual vegetables, which can sometimes be hard to get in during breakfast. For lunch, I'm going to be making a hummus and mushroom toast, which has been a favorite for us here this past week, so we've been having it a lot for lunch. I just diced up half of an onion along with 8 or 9 mushrooms. I'm using baby Bella mushrooms here, but you can use any kind of mushroom. White button ones also work really well. And I'm just going to saute those off in a pan with some herbed salt and also plenty of red pepper flakes. I just threw in some of those veggies in the pan to get them started, and I'm just going to continue to slice up my mushrooms and throw them in the pan as I cut them up. I'm gonna let this cook down for just a little bit, and then a few minutes in, I'll add in a tablespoon or 2 of tomato paste. This is going to add some extra depth and sweetness to our mushrooms. Cooking down the mushrooms already produces a ton of umami flavor. Mushrooms are always something that I turn to when I am trying to cook more plant-based, and if I don't want to cook meat, because they do end up with such a meaty flavor and texture that I don't ever miss meat as long as I have mushrooms. The tomatoes also add a lot of that umami flavor as well. And at the end of the cooking time, I'm going to add in some kale just to add some nice leafy greens in there. These are just going to need a minute or two to cook down. I'm also going to mince some parsley. This is going to make a nice topping for our toasts. So once the filling is all cooked down, it's time to assemble our toast. I have some homemade sandwich bread here, and I'm going to put a nice spoonful of hummus on top and spread that over it. These are going to be, I call these toasts, but they're basically just like open face sandwiches, and I really like to load them up. After I spread the hummus on the toast, I can just load it up with that mushroom, tomato paste, and kale filling that I made. And this meal is pretty good as is. You can just leave it with the hummus and this topping. But I also decided to add a soft-boiled egg on top just because I had them in my fridge, and this will add another little boost of protein in here and make this a little bit more filling. I also have some leftover grilled vegetables from the other night, so I'm going to serve these alongside the toasts to finish off the meal. We have some grilled onions as well as some grilled cabbage. So here is the finished meal. It's super quick to put together, so it's great for a quick lunch. It is filled with really deep savory flavors and lots of veggies, along with a good boost of protein from that hummus and the eggs on top as well. So even though this is technically a toast, I did load it up quite a bit, so it can be quite messy to eat. I ended up just eating this with a fork and a knife. But either way you decide to eat it, it is a very delicious lunch. For dinner, I'm actually going to be trying out a new recipe, and it's from one of my favorite cookbooks. This is Dinner by Melissa Clark, and I am going to be trying out this curried okra with tomatoes and onions and lime. In the description, it says that this is a great meal to make when you have fresh okra and tomatoes straight from the garden, but that it's also great with frozen okra and canned tomatoes, which is exactly what I have right now. So I thought it would be fun to try this out because I had all the ingredients already, and I was kind of looking for a new way to use up my last bag of frozen okra. We've been having it a lot in gumbo, but I did want to try something different, so I thought this recipe would be perfect. I'm slicing up half of a large onion here, as well as a few cloves of garlic. As well as a knob of ginger, which I'm going to mince finely. And then other than that, there isn't a ton of prep work for this dish. So I've got some olive oil in my pan here, and I'm going to add in the onions and let those cook for a little bit until they start to get browned. While my onions are cooking down, I had pulled out some pinto beans from my freezer. These are kind of like southern style pinto beans that I had cooked up at the very beginning of Pantry Challenge. I pulled out some ham from the freezer as well as some seasoning peppers, but you can totally just leave this vegetarian and just do regular beans. I just thought that this would make a nice side dish to go along with the meal, and it was a really easy addition since it was already made. I just have to heat it up in a pot. So back to the onions, I added the fresh garlic and the ginger, and then for the spices, I have a few teaspoons of curry powder as well as some ground cumin. I also threw in some whole cumin in there. It wasn't in the recipe, but I figured might as well double down on the cumin flavor. And I'm just gonna let those spices bloom and toast off in that oil for a little bit before I add the rest of the ingredients. So to finish this off, I just have to add the okra and the tomatoes. So I have some frozen okra. This is okra from the garden last year. And then I also put in a can of homegrown tomatoes in there as well. I feel like okra and tomatoes are a pretty common pairing, especially for southern cooking, because these things grow so well in the south and they kind of are producing at the same time. But I thought that this recipe was interesting that it was a curried version, and I thought it would be really fun to try out. So that's going to need about 10 to 15 minutes for everything to kind of cook down and for all those flavors to meld. Meanwhile, I'm going to pull together a cornbread. Cornbread is a super easy, quick bread that I love to serve alongside any like more southern style meals like this. And it's really nice and easy because you basically just dump all of the ingredients into a bowl and then you put it into your baking dish. For my recipe, you can either use 1/3 cup of melted butter or vegetable oil. I'm using melted butter here today. I have found that if you use vegetable oil, sometimes I have to bake this for an extra 5 or even 10 minutes. But if I'm using butter, this cooks through in 25 minutes. But other than the baking time, it takes 5 minutes to whip cornbread together. I don't even care like what order I dump them into the bowl. I just throw all of the ingredients together, and then this goes into a buttered 8x8 Pyrex. And this just has to bake in the oven at 400 degrees for about 25 minutes. Here is the final meal with our curried okra and tomatoes. I have those pinto beans on the side along with our fresh cornbread, and I also serve this with some of our green tomato relish as well as a wedge of lime. So I thought this was a really nice southern spread with lots of different things. The verdict on the curried okra and tomatoes, it was okay. I don't know if it was like my favorite thing, so I don't know if I'd make it again, but it was really fun to try out, and that's the thing with cooking. Sometimes you won't have winners, but sometimes you might find your next favorite thing. For dessert that day, I decided to make some cinnamon rolls, which is not something I make very often, so this was definitely a nice special treat for us. I have a 9x13 Pyrex that I'm just buttering up just to have my pan prepared for when it's time to make the cinnamon rolls. And I've already prepared the dough beforehand up to the first rise. So I'll just link the recipe that I followed down below if you want to see how to make that dough, but it's a pretty standard dough making process. I just stuck everything in my stand mixer and let that go for a few minutes until the dough was nice and soft, and then I let it rise for an hour and a half or 2 hours. The recipe I'm using is kind of like a Cinnabon style cinnamon roll. They're gonna be really big and gooey and delicious. And this is Aaron's favorite kind of cinnamon roll. So he requested that I make a Cinnabon style cinnamon roll. So here's the dough that I had prepped. And again, this has gone through its first rise already. So I just have to punch that down. And we're gonna roll this out. I'm using my rolling pin here to get it really nice and even. I think the final size it was supposed to be was like 16 by 21. I don't usually measure though. I just roll it out until it looks good to me. And then I have some softened butter that I'm going to smush all over the surface. I'm just using my hands. There might be a better way to do this, but I think it's easier to spread it out with just your fingers. And then the filling for this is a mixture of brown sugar and cinnamon. So I'm just spreading that out evenly, getting it all the way up to the edges so those end pieces have that filling as well. And then starting from the short side, I'm gonna start rolling this up. The reason I decided to make cinnamon rolls is because we went to IKEA the other day and we were there pretty close to closing time. So by the time we checked out and wanted to get cinnamon rolls, they were all sold out and it was really sad. So I told Aaron that since we didn't get cinnamon rolls at IKEA, I was just gonna make him cinnamon rolls the next day to make up for it. So anyway, now I am cutting the cinnamon rolls into 12 pieces. I'm using some unflavored dental floss here to make some nice cuts without the dough squishing, which would happen if you use a knife. This was a really nice trick that was really fun to do. And those swirls just look so perfect. I am really happy with how these came out. So I'm placing all of my rolls in the 9x13 pan. The 12 rolls fit so perfectly in here and I just love how beautiful they look. And these are gonna have to rise one more time, so that's gonna take another 30 to 40 minutes. I'm just gonna cover that with a cloth while that rises. Here they are after rising, and you can see how nice and puffy they are. And they're touching now and kind of smushed together, so I'm gonna bake this in the oven. These are gonna bake at 400 degrees for 15 minutes, which I thought was too little, so I actually let them go closer to like 18 minutes. And this is what they look like fresh out of the oven. The centers have really puffed up, so they look kind of funny, but they look delicious. You can see that butter and brown sugar mixture just bubbling up. This is going to be, unfortunately, too hot for us to eat yet, so meanwhile, I'm going to make the cream cheese frosting. We've got more butter along with some cream cheese, some powdered sugar, and some vanilla extract. This is definitely like an extra step. Usually I would just do a simple powdered sugar frosting, but I thought, why not? I already made these beautiful cinnamon rolls. I thought I would go all out and make this delicious cream cheese frosting to go with them. After those rolls are pretty much all cooled down, it's time to eat them. We each chose the cinnamon roll we wanted. Aaron chose the biggest one he could find, of course, and then I chose a nice smaller sized one. And then you just slather your cream cheese frosting on top. This is way better than IKEA cinnamon rolls, if I do say so myself, so I'm actually kind of glad that they were sold out and I went home and made these the next day. I'm really happy with how these came out. I really like that dough, so I'm definitely saving this for future reference. The only thing maybe I would cut back is I didn't end up using all of the butter for the filling, and maybe cutting back on that filling sugar as well. But overall, it was a very delicious dessert for that day, and we maybe might have ended up eating 2 of these each and then immediately had a sugar crash. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and seeing what we ate for a day this week. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you again in the next one.